Sweden used to be a model country, a place where rational and honest people enjoyed great schools and free healthcare, a place of freedom and equality. Now it's on its way to becoming another kind of model, a warning example of a suicidal immigration policy. Sweden, as you think of it, is soon but a memory. It's going to be another messy, inegalitarian surveillance state, perhaps even one of the worst. Immigration can be great for a country. It all depends on the nature and then the number of the immigrants. First of all, the immigrants need to be willing and able to adapt to the way of the natives, and they need to be able to contribute economically. Secondly, the number of immigrants should not be so large that it becomes difficult for them to integrate, or so large that it destroys the identity of the host country. These are the two laws of good immigration. Sweden is violating both. The nature of the immigrants is such that they will not, as a group, benefit Sweden. They pose an existential threat both in terms of economy and in terms of values and identity. Most of them are fully educated people from the Middle East and Africa. On top of that, many are Muslim. The number is staggering. Native Swedes will be a minority in their own country by 2045. Since a country is its people, Sweden has conclusively ceased to exist at that point. In violating the two laws of good immigration, Swedish immigration strategy can be seen as French or British in style. A. Group immigrants in ghettos outside the center of the cities. B. Make sure that they have no pressure to become Swedish by giving them the basic necessities of life. C. Encourage large families by generous benefits. D. Provide excuses on their behalf if they misbehave. No need to add on the details here. The British and the French now live in terror. The subway bombing, the decapitation in broad daylight of a British soldier, Charlie Hebdo, and the Paris attacks of November 2015. The results, in terms of people killed and raped and otherwise victimized due to non-European immigration, have been well known for decades. Even some politicians are becoming aware of them. What will the future be like? Children are the future, and the future is, as said, one where natives born to native parents are becoming a minority by mid-century. Children are shaped into adults by peers, parents, and schools. If their parents are not Swedish, there is no guarantee that they will assume a Swedish identity and respect Swedish values. Immigrants to Sweden are often not excited about throwing out their old identity and becoming Swedes. In fact, Swedes themselves strongly discourage the immigrants from accepting a traditional Swedish identity. Indeed, they even deny that there is such a thing as Swedish identity, or insofar as they think it exists, they ridicule it, because we are just people and all the same. Sweden is admired for its good schools, but it is rarely known that Swedish secondary education is private, to an extent of twice the global average. And objectively, Swedish schools are a failure. The annual PISA test ranks Sweden at the bottom of OECD nations. So while academics in the US are still holding up Sweden as a utopia, American students are actually scoring better than Swedish students. Part of this tendency of failing schools is the goodness complex. Sweden has adapted to most far-out radical educational ideas, meaning that memorizations, facts, and respect for the teacher are abandoned. Chaos reigns.
Jag är invandrare. Hatar alla. Jag vet inte. Nej, jag är inte invandrare. Men du är vägrare. Kalla inte mig invandrare. Och bråkar du på det här viset så kommer det få... Kalla mig inte invandrare, hallå. Så kommer du få ett helsike. Fuck you, sorry. Vad kallar du invandrare? Sluta med dig. Inga sådana där, då åker du ut. Jag vill inte ha. Och du kallar mig inte rasist. Kalla mig inte invandrare. Ja, men lägg av. Sätt dig. Försvinn härifrån. Jag vill inte ha dig här. Försvinn. Försvinn.
Chaos mostly hurts the most vulnerable students in need of structure. Some of these are immigrant children. Another part of the explanation is immigration. As ill-prepared foreign students are struggling, they are slowing down the education for the native students. Also, immigration with low aptitude simply bring their low aptitude with them from where they came. Syrians will score lower than Iranians and higher than Nigerians whether they are in their own home countries or in Sweden. Since Swedes want to be the goodest in the world, they will not talk about this explanation, which is nice of them, but it also prevents them from taking rational measures. Therefore, despite data showing the immigrant children are testing worse than natives, they think the immigration is good for their schools. Diversity, they say, is good for education. But where is the evidence for this? One might ask, should not the value of diversity have led to increased PISA scores? But no Swede will ask this. Despite some of the most diverse schools having to be shut down, the Swedes can't. Diversity makes a better school. It's almost funny. If public schools and ordinary charter schools, so-called free schools, are failing, those with money will move their children to expensive private schools and even abroad. This means that Swedes will not share their formative experiences. This inequality will exacerbate other inequalities and undermine any notion of we, the Swedes. The universities will also be negatively affected. In order to give low-performing foreign groups a chance, the standards for college will have to drop. Have to institute an affirmative action program discriminating against the native population. The tax money parents have paid for the universities will not be spent on their children, even when they have more aptitude, but on immigrants. This will lower Sweden's intellectual capital and create resentment and discord. Are things really going to be this bad? Yes, and it is already pretty bad. Schools are on fire, hundreds every year, costing billions.
Det finns ingenting kvar nästan.
Violence. There will be school shootings, lots of shootings in general. Since the model for immigration is what could be called French, we will see riots and cars burning. There have already been several. Then you will have some terrorist attacks by angry young Muslim men.
Vel møtt til Dagsrevyen. De siste 3 årene har politiet I Oslo etterforsket.
Just as Norway, Sweden has already begun to experience new forms of violence against women, for example, group rapes. Recently, a girl was gang raped by some Somali men. She later killed herself. This form of violence was virtually unheard of, and some would see it as an unacceptable price to pay for whatever benefit non-European immigration is thought to bring. Things will get much worse for women, as both their safety and their rights will be threatened by reactionary immigrants. As we have seen, the French model of allowing immigrants to form parallel societies means that worlds can avoid colliding for a while. Medieval views on women can therefore coexist with extravagant feminism. While girls are being thrown off of balconies for disobeying the patriarchy, yes, this happens frequently in the New Sweden, feminists are focusing on the gender wage gap and are imitating USA's queer and transgender issues. Swedish feminists have continued to be super radical, while also embracing the project of importing ultra-patriarchal and macho ideals from the worst places on earth for women. This is darkly comical. Radical women defending the importation of people who want to take away their rights. Once the worlds collide, it is a question of power. And unfortunately, a civilized person can't do much to resist a violent bigot, so there will be concessions. Women in Norway have already begun to color their blonde hair dark to avoid harassment. Similar concessions in dress and other private behavior will occur in Sweden. In Sweden, bathhouses have been gender segregated in order to humor a puritanical immigrant sensibility. What is true about women will be true about gays. At this point, gay people have often lived in gay-friendly areas of big cities, but one day they will be unable to escape homophobic attitudes. Already, gay men in immigration communities pretend to be straight. Eventually, we will see feminists and gay activists react, but at the point where they realize that a resistance to irrational immigration policy can be based on a concern for liberal, even radical and egalitarian values, it will be too late. They will have to accept that a large portion of Swedes will be anti-women's rights and anti-gay, a collapse in common values that will create stress on an everyday scale. Important freedoms will be lost. An indication of intolerant times to come are the Swedish Jews. Half of all the Jews of Malmö, Sweden's most diverse city, a canary in the multicultural mine, have fled the city. They no longer feel safe. The culprits are not stupid neo-Nazis of the old type, but of the new, equally insipid and bigoted Islamo-Nazi type. The bigotry against Jews has been largely ignored. The mayor of Malmö blames Zionists. a perfect example of finding excuses for bad behavior that sets a dangerous precedent. The result of the failure of ignoring the two laws of good immigration, the right immigrants and the right number of them, is predictable, particularly in combination with the establishment's refusal to take responsibility or accept any criticism. Sweden will finally see some real fascists, both the Islamic kind and the domestic kind. These radicals will provide raison d'etre for each other in an ever more destructive spiral of violence. Domestic terrorists will appear, a Swedish Breivik in the making. And so security will be tightened, cameras in schools and trains everywhere. As this is a practical matter, Swedes will excel. The police will have increased number and powers. The wealthy will buy security from private firms. There will then be a gun debate similar to the one in the US. Freedoms will have to be taken away from a people where too many are not to be trusted. A people without virtue cannot have rights. The economy will suffer. Sweden is doing relatively well at this time, at the end of 2015, but it will soon take a serious downturn. Mark my words. The Swedes have no idea just how much of the ability of Sweden to be outstanding rested on its calm, monocultural, morally cohesive people. However, not all sectors of the economy will suffer. Those sectors of the economy involved in keeping a fragmenting society together, like private security, will thrive. Certain professions will see a boom. Prison guards, police, social workers, psychologists, special education teachers, translators, lawyers, and so on. Money can also be made in real estate. The good, native, white areas will see increasing property values as people seek to hide from the consequences of a flawed immigration policy. If you want to introduce gated communities to Sweden, now is the time. Be the first. For a country priding itself on the allemansrätt, every man's right to walk through larger properties, once this happens, the spirit of this country is dead. Sorry, Sweden, your soul just died. Many Swedes will simply leave, speeding up the process. The greatest losers are ordinary middle-class or working-class Swedes, and the old, who tomorrow will wake up in a foreign land. A place where they are afraid to send their kids to kindergarten and school, and where hospitals are crowded with needy and sometimes violent people who may not even speak Swedish. A place where only those with money can escape the worst effects of national deconstruction. A place where there is a constant, vexing litany of crimes on the news, and an endless, rebarbative, and divisive discourse about racism and inequality and similar epiphenomena of a failed immigration policy. Why do Swedes want to expose themselves and their children to these certain evils? Without this type of immigration, there would be no terrorist threat in Sweden, and none of the attendant distrust and police state surveillance. There would be no gang rapes. There would be no burning schools, no riots, no hand grenades exploding in the streets. There would be no deep and widespread inequality and alienation. There would be no high-strung PC police and thought crimes, and no sizable left-wing and right-wing extremism. There would be no endless, repetitive, obfuscatory, and boring public and private discourse on how to deal with immigration-related worries. So why? Why do Swedes voluntarily and unnecessarily invite into their country all the troubles that they have so far escaped? Why exchange peace and prosperity for fear and inequality? There are 5 main reasons. First, there has been peace and prosperity for as long as Swedes can remember. This means that they take order for granted. They think peace and cohesion is normal. They don't understand that their trustful and open society is rare, and that it is dependent on a population that share values and goals to a large enough extent that they can collaborate peacefully. Swedes taking order for granted, insouciantly seek to remove the common grounds that make their free, equal, and orderly society function. They have abandoned religion and nationalism and are now mostly held together by the fact that most Swedes are decent, rational, nice, and good rule followers. They don't understand that countries like Libya, Iraq, and Syria fail to function as anything but authoritarian states because they are ethnically and religiously diverse and lack a proper cohesive patriotism. Swedes are voluntarily creating a similar fragile and hard-to-govern society, having no idea about the immense value of their hard-won moral and national homogeneity. This is ignorance. Second, they are rationalistic in their worldview. Nations, religions, and races are all just silly old irrational notions. This is fine. There's even truth in it, but Swedes at the same time believe that everyone is the same as they are. Everyone is equal. Everyone simply wants to get a good job. The Swedes, in effect, think that they are the measure of all man. If someone is begging, or a criminal, or a radical, or violent, then this, the Swedes think, is a form of illness that they can't be held responsible for. They really aren't like that. They're just like us. They just need a hug. It's a form of naivete. They believe that just because their secular liberal democracy is the most rational, it will also be accepted by all in due time. As if barbarians did not overrun Rome and Spartans didn't defeat the Athenians, events the Swedes know literally nothing about. Third, the goodness complex. Having failed to defeat Hitler in the Second World War, now they want to be the best at fighting evil and being good. Good in the most radical way possible. They take in more refugees per million inhabitants than any other country in the world. In their mind, they are a humanitarian superpower. This might seem laughable from a non-Swedish point of view, since it suggests that Sweden, a country of 9 million, can heal the world by letting in some troubled peoples when there are billions upon billions of troubled people in the world. Clearly, Sweden can do its modest share of good by being a functioning country, a model that other people can learn from to improve themselves. And Sweden can help by having an educated population traveling out in the world to help, like many Swedish missionaries do, and by having great inventors and research institutions and businesses that greatly benefit mankind. Indeed, Sweden can clearly help many times more people by helping these people where they are, rather than helping a few by bringing them to Sweden. But none of this matters. This is not about reason. It's about being a humanitarian superhero. It's naivete. It is also hubris, a goodness complex squared with a superiority complex. All other countries have experienced social problems with immigrants, but Swedes think that they are so morally superior that these problems cannot touch them. Which brings us to, fourth, Swedes are post-Christian, both in the sense of being overtly anti-religious, but at the same time profoundly in the grip of a Christian ethics. Like good Christians, they are diffident about acting in self-interest. Sacrificing yourself to serve others is the highest moral good. Everyone is equal in the eyes of God becomes in the secular expression a complete internationalism and the denial of any national borders. The sacrifice of Christ becomes the idea that even if Swedes are harmed in the process, we must help the weak. The original sin becomes the idea that having a rich country means that they have sinned somewhere, a guilt complex that can be cleansed by taking on all the troubles of the world. Christianity and post-Christianity in Sweden, in spite of what they think, is one of the best things about Sweden, but it is a liability when applied to immigration policy. Christians in Sweden are some of the most pro-immigration because they want to help. Their motive is so pure and their view of the immigrants so idealized that all dangerous consequences are denied any weight. Fifth, Swedes are rule followers by nature and have a great respect for the expert. They have a great fear of not being a team player or of being regarded as outside or other, meaning that few dare to question the sagacity of the establishment's extreme and radical project of replacing the native population with a non-European one, that is, the project of annihilating Sweden. Is there any hope? No, there is no hope. Even when the negative effects are in full effect, Swedes will blame themselves and act like Christians sacrificing themselves. Also, any reaction will be too late. Remember the fifth reason. The main concern of normal Swedes is with fitting in, having the right brand on their clothes and the most fashionable attitudes, spending money in some hip bar on the weekends. There is no intelligent debate in Sweden. It's very primitive. The immigration issue is never treated as practical questions of how many immigrants and what kind of immigrants most benefit Sweden, but rather as a question of dark versus light, good versus evil. It's a pseudo-religious space of unreason, and heterodoxy is severely punished. People lose their jobs and are hung out in the media if they dare to question the moral superpower fantasy. There are also other psychological mechanisms at play. The immigration question animates a rather boring and gray every day, and it is a morally sanctioned release for anger. They get so angry, and their anger is sanctified. It is holy anger. Even if they tried to have a more rational discussion, it would fail. For example, the ordinary decent Swede still believes that the resistance to a high level of immigration is not based on a grasp of the two principles of good immigration. They think it must have to do with loving Adolf Hitler, I kid you not. The Swedes don't get it, and never will, for they are stuck thinking in obsolete political categories of left and right, fascism and Nazism, and so on. All left liberal, educated types, often genuinely nice people, somehow have convinced themselves that they must also embrace a borderless anti-nationalism libertarian fantasy, even if it undermines the basis for the freedom and rights they rightly treasure. They can't understand that the resistance to an irresponsible and radical immigration policy can be based on the wish to preserve a free and equal society. They can't grasp that the dangerous radicals are not a few sad skinheads who live with their moms, but rather the establishment who want to dismantle the popular basis for a decent society by replacing the native population. Yes, it is darkly comical to see lefties embrace neoliberal ideas that destroy the future of the native working class and threatens important progress made for women. As I said, this is not at all a left versus right issue. The left and right have colluded in this national suicide. Let me explain. First, there is no conservative party in Sweden. The parties calling themselves right-wing are really radicals wanting to destroy tradition and communal values in the name of free markets. They are neoliberals, individualists, and anti-nationalists. The egalitarian welfare state symbolic of Sweden is their target. They want change, not preservation of values. During the time the right, Moderaterna, governed, immigration exploded. Globalization means that capital can now find new markets and cheaper labor, while the unions and the middle class in their home countries wither. In fact, the leader of Moderaterna explicitly stated that he would use immigration as a tool to crush the unions and the welfare state. The idea is that the welfare state is dependent on high taxation. High taxation is dependent on the willingness of people to contribute, which is dependent on a trust and solidarity between people and generations of people. The contract was that we all put in when we work, and then we take out when we are retired or when needy. If Swedes see each other as in some sense brothers and sisters with a common history or story, they may be willing to contribute. Now the contract is broken. Swedes are using the capital on immigrants rather than their own old and their own children. There is no basis for feeling obliged to support such a system. People will not want to contribute. They realize it's everyone for themselves, and so neoliberalism has triumphed. In fact, it has made its own model of society as self-seeking atomic individuals come true. And the left? The left has aided this project by conceiving of the just society as primarily one where the individual's freedom is guaranteed by having the state underwriting the means to independence. The state provides the fuck you money for each citizen. This way they are free to pursue any lifestyle they want without any reliance on actual people around them. Ironically, the positive rights even enables and encourages a mock rebellious attitude to the state. The state says, here's some money, now you don't have to rely on each other, but be free individuals. So the left is, again this is actually hilarious, working tirelessly to realize the new right's neoliberal vision of man and society. They also support a globalization that will crush their unions by outsourcing abroad and cheap imported labor in the white, gray, and black sectors at home. In other words, the left promotes the kind of isolation and lack of solidarity that in the end makes the welfare state impossible. Perhaps we shouldn't say that there is absolutely no organized resistance to the madness. Recently, a party has emerged which seeks to reform the levels of immigration to be more on a similar level to those of other European countries. They are called the Sverigedemokraterna, Sweden Democrats. They're known as anti-immigration, but they are not. Rather, they get the two principles of good immigration and are really just moderates, but they are treated as a reincarnation of NSDAP. They have risen from nothing to become one of the biggest parties. Still, few will admit that they voted for them out of fear of losing their jobs and their friends. Perhaps they can do some damage control, but they can't bring back the Sweden that was once the envy of the world. A huge part of why the political and intellectual climate is so dismal is the media and the establishment. The state-run media will take political sides and even release dirt on immigration reformers the day before elections. Newspapers will secretly hack opposition politicians' cell phones. Black-clad leftist stormtroopers will violently enforce the establishment agenda with impunity. Names and facts will be rewritten to hide the truth. Also, information crucial to forming opinions is legally blacked out and redacted, like names and the ethnicities of convicted criminals. In fact, they would rather risk that people get raped and beaten up than provide fair warnings that include markers that could be interpreted as racist. Think soft Eastern German thought control. It is enough to express some doubts about the wisdom of the establishment's policy and you are labeled a racist and a Nazi. There's no sense of reality at all. Again, it is that fixation on notions that belong to fighting Hitler rather than any analyzing the real issues threatening Sweden today. Some establishment persons will perhaps jump ship and pretend never to have been for the destruction of their country, but mostly the trajectory to social collapse will hold steady. Journalists will double down on their failures and blame every bad thing that happens not on immigration policy, but on an ever more cartoonish, mostly imagined extreme right wing, and no objective assessment will ever be approached. The perennial trope, not every ex is a criminal or terrorist, will be repeated ad nauseum, as if this was a legitimate response to thousands of native Swedes' lives ruined by those who really are bad and who should not have been allowed into the country. Of course most immigrants are nice. That's not the issue. The issue is, what happens when a small monoculture society lets in large numbers of people who do not share their experiences and values? And the answer is, it destroys itself. But in any case, this was an explanation for some terrible event that you've recently heard about. It's not a political call to action because at this point there is nothing to be done. Sweden is now a model country, a model of how to destroy the foundations for peace, equality, and prosperity. The Sweden that acted as utopia is no more.